to the June, no, that's not it. May, how about 16th? Next May 16th meeting of the Lake Forest Historic Preservation Commission. The commission is here tonight to work together with all of you, property owners, neighbors, and architects, to continue the tradition that was established nearly 40 years ago in this community. That tradition is a review process that allows community members to work together to preserve the qualities and unique character that make Lake Forest a special community. The City of Lake Forest is committed to conducting open and democratic meetings. To achieve that goal, meeting procedures have been adopted by the Commission. A copy of the procedures is available at the back of the room on each agenda. As always, it's the intent of the Commission to help manage the development and the growth of the City of Lake Forest with a keen sense of preserving the historic structures and open space in the city for all its present and future residents. Our goal is to move, in this case, this petition before us tonight through the review process as quickly as possible while balancing the interests of the petitioners, neighboring property owners, and larger community. Good evening. I'll start with the introduction of the commissioners.
Hi, Jim Preschlack.
Guy Berg.
Kurt Pairitz.
Fred Moyer.
Bill Ransom.
All right, and I believe that we don't have any meeting minutes for this evening, and I think that there may be a brief presentation from the petitioner on changes from our last meeting. We had an extensive presentation last week on this subject and a lot of public feedback, so we're hoping this evening to focus on the changes to the plan, both in terms of the presentation this evening and public comments. So Ralph, if you want to.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to disclose that I did have an ex parte contact with Sandy Gannon. He called me just to get my email address and send that correspondence, which is included in our packet tonight. So I just wanted to disclose that. It has no effect on my deliberations this evening.
Thanks, Commissioner Ransom. I appreciate you reminding me of that. Actually, I'll ask if anyone else had any of those contacts, because I know that there were people that were trying to reach different commissioners.
I had an ex parte conversation with one of the representatives from the petitioning body, and it has no impact on my deliberations.
I got a voicemail from Joan Dupre, and I left a message back. There's no conflict there. And also Basil Falcone had called me and had a brief conversation with him and his wife, and there's no conflict there.
All right. Anybody else?
Oh, I had a series of voicemails left for me at my home and my office. I didn't hear any of them. They were reported to me by my wife, and understanding that I'm not supposed to have contacts, I didn't. So I want to apologize to anyone who tried to reach me, and I did not return your call, so I apologize.
So, in an effort to proceed with the meeting, I will also disclose that I got some emails that I forwarded on to Kathy. So I think it's fair to say that we've asked everyone, and I think no one has any conflict really with respect to any of that context. So for all you listening, the best process to always, for any Historic Preservation Commission agenda item, is to send your comments to the city staff, because that way they can be sent to all of the commissioners and they can be entered into the public record. So that's a little for the future. Thanks, Ralph.
Ralph Giswaldo, 40-plus year resident of Lake Forest and the current chair of the Forest Park Project Board. I think the opportune word was brief, and I hope to be extremely brief in my comments tonight. Thank you. I'm here to present to you changes in our plan since our last meeting, and we're just going to focus in on those changes. One of the things that came out of the last meeting was, in our master plan, you wanted more detail on from our Historic Preservation Committee for clarification of our findings of the history of Forest Park. And I think we've provided you those clarification. We've added it to the master plan, and we've also added some clarification through a letter from Gail Hodges and from Art Miller as well. So hopefully, if you have questions on those tonight, we're available to answer those questions as well. The master plan we present you tonight, you also asked for some definition on what is inclusive in the master plan. And it's strictly the tableland above the beach, inclusive of the bluff and ravines, not including the beach or beach accesses. We are recommended repair to the Belvedere stairs, but have not included the Belvedere stairs in our plan, even though we do believe that restoration and refurbishing those stairs is something that should be done at a future date. We reviewed the parking. Parking was an area of concern in our plan. Mostly had to do with the elimination of the central core parking. It is still our committee's recommendation for the elimination of the central core parking. But we felt it was prudent to land bank some parking if the city in the future decides that they need parking. So I think in our plan tonight, we plan on showing you an area of 4 to 6 cars, and it's possibly can grow from there for land banking parking. I would once again say that it's not our recommendation to have parking in the central core, but we felt it was prudent that in the future, one of the things we felt needed to be covered in the master plan, if the city or one of the boards decided that parking was available, we wanted to designate where that parking should go. And one of the things we plan on doing is coming up with some buffers. In the event that parking does go in there, we are going to have a landscape plan to buffer out the parking as well. We made a change to the parking for the handicap spaces. They were originally just south of the Belvedere stairs. We have moved those from the east side of the road to the west side of the road and have actually put them in as handicap spaces in the plan now. We thought that opened up the view corridors. We didn't have handicap parking there as people drove along the road, because that is one of the key view corridors that we have, and that was a suggestion that came out of our last meeting as well. We've maintained the pass system as presented in our last meeting with the elimination of the northern spur. We actually had a northern spur that went from the path that went out into that northern wooded area. We've eliminated that spur. We felt that this respects the history of the northern view of the wooded area. We've also we're asked for some clarification on plowing. We are recommending that the paths be plowed, and we've asked for the city to check into that and make sure they have the right plows. The paths are designed to be plowed, but it may take some different equipment to do it, so we've asked for the city to check into that as well. We've also, one of the recommendations that came out of this was we've eliminated the stone bollard on the west path that was near Deerpath Road. I think that came from Mr. Ransom. We've eliminated that bollard. We didn't see a use for it. That was a good suggestion. We feel the changes that we've made along with the entire master plan honor and respect while rehabilitating Forest Park so that it will be enjoyed by our community for the next 100 years. I want to thank this board as well as the Park and Rec Board. A lot of the changes that you see tonight and a lot of the changes that we've made, and I think we've talked about this in the past, have come from feedback we've gotten from the boards, feedback we've gotten from the city staff, and feedback we've got from the community residents. You know, I think we truly have a better plan today than we had, 2 years ago, or even 6 months ago, or possibly even 4 weeks ago. So I thank you for those suggestions. I think they continue to improve the plan. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to ask Cliff to come up and just go through those areas one by one, and maybe if we can approach it one by one, we can answer the questions that you may have as we go through the changes that we've made.
Okay, great.
One more comment. I was out of town last week. I didn't email or call anybody. I just want you to know that.
We appreciate that.
Cliff?
Tell me about it.
I'm just going to take you through the plan. So that Cliff Miller, landscape architect, chair of the Landscape and Horticultural Committee, and Lake Forest resident. But I'd like to just sort of take you through. Here's the plan, the larger plan. It's hard to see. The changes are shown here that we made, but what we've done is broken them down for you. And you can see the areas that are boxed in red, those identify changes, and either in the approach we're taking or the physical design of the park. That long skinny box that you see up here, that was the northern spur that we removed from the trail. This over here is where the landing is and the Belvedere. You can also see right here, that's the parking set aside. We've changed the layout within the landing and also changed the benches that are in here. We are recommending phasing of the benches. And the circled ones here, the tables, picnic table and bench here, those are things that we would recommend for later installation if it was deemed necessary. They're on the plan, that's where we'd put them, but that's something that we thought could take course over time. In the middle section, again, you'll see the parking area here that's banked. This is right across from the south end of the Belvedere. It's in the area where the existing parking is. And that currently, down here, what we've done is, if you remember, there was a pull-off here right on the main central view. What we did is switched it southerly, moved it across, and we've created that as the handicapped-only parking. People are going to pull off there. It's the reality of the situation. People are going to pull off. There was a little bit of a misunderstanding last time we presented about what those pull-offs were insofar as parking or not parking. They really were pull-offs, not a place to park and get out and wander around. This is for handicap parking, dedicated as such, but you're gonna get people who pull over there. The good part about them being designated is you're not gonna have many people leave their cars there. They're gonna sit, take a look at the view, and move on without having to have additional signage to create that situation. So I see it as a win-win. We get the handicap right by the view they may wanna have. We get it out of the way of the people that are actually in the main center. I don't know what happened to my marker here. Really bad aim, I guess. We get them out of this main center zone and we move them here and switch them across the street. So they don't affect as much the benches that are, you know, in this primary view shed. I mean, obviously the whole road is here and cars are gonna be driving by you while you are in that zone. So, you know, we're not gonna get that kind of intimate personal experience, nor is it planned to be here. That's what the northern and southern pedestrian view sheds are for. And you can see again here, benches that are not recommended at this point. I mean, they're not, I shouldn't say not recommended. They're proposed to be phased at a later date. Down at the south end, we also have a picnic table here, phased at a later date. Benches here and benches here, phased at a later date. Within that, if you look at the lighting here, you can see, here's the lighting that currently exists on the street, of the ring road, I should say. Here's the type of lighting that is currently on the landings. It's, I think it might even be plastic part of it, but this is one of the inconsistencies that we're dealing with. Here's the stone bollard light that was proposed for just this area up in here at the safety points. Light fast, you know, the light would be facing easterly. The light intensity of the park will be no different now, you know, under this plan than it is currently. This bollard that we talked about would be removed. Actually, what we've done is put a street lamp there. So all the big circles are the street lamps that already exist. A couple of them have been shifted, and the little circles represent the pedestrian points where we think for safety we need additional lighting. So by keeping real low this fixture, which is about 24 inches or so, we minimize the effect that has. So you can see those changes. Here's the benches themselves. You can see one of the pictures of what's there. There's quite a combination of them. Here's one of the ones proposed we'll get into later in the picnic table. And up here you can see the ones that are starred are the ones that we're talking about doing now, and the ones that aren't are the ones that would be phased in. I think that was clearer on the earlier picture where the graphic was stronger. You have the north and south and the central places. The interior ones pretty much known except for the center one goes in now. That's pretty much the changes that we've made since the last time we talked to you. You know, we thought long and hard about your suggestions. We took them to heart and went back to the drawing board, had conversations, and as you know, because you got a lot of emails, well, we dealt with a lot of people and a lot of suggestions. And this is what we think is best. You know, this is where we think the park works best. We think it brings to the table what our group and the other two forums think is the best solution for Forest Park, and we'll hope that you would agree.
All right, thank you. The procedures for this meeting have been slightly altered. Instead of having a comment and question period from the commissioners right now for the petition, the procedures show having public testimony next. I'm going to ask the commissioners if they like that procedure, or if you have comments or questions you'd like to ask right now from the...
Are we having any staff report this evening?
There's not a staff report, but we can ask questions to
Okay.
Kathy as well. So we can either do that now, or we can do that after public testimony, or both, if you prefer.
I just inquire of the staff if there's any comments they want to make without questions.
I think only that this project is before you tonight for action. You've had many meetings on it, many back and forth. You've had an opportunity to provide comments. I think what you have is really what is in front of you, and I don't see any benefit at this point in prolonging this, that it really is appropriate for you to, at this point, take a step and take action. And along that line, you do have a staff report that recommends approval, subject to conditions, as the commission often does. As you see petitions, you often either make requirements for changes or make suggestions for modifications. You have two actions before you. One is in response to direction from the City Council to make a recommendation to them on the plan. It's not an official action. It's not something that is It's certainly something that you're authorized to do by the ordinance, but there are not any specific criteria. I did hear from some of you that you wanted to think through some criteria upon which you would evaluate the plan. I have crafted some there for you to kind of guide that thinking. Your recommendation on the plan itself will go forward to the City Council. That is scheduled for City Council action this coming Monday, May 21st. If you choose to add conditions to that, they would consider those conditions, and the council could decide to accept the plan or not accept the plan. Your second action is action on a certificate of appropriateness. That certificate of appropriateness, again, as many certificates that come before you, have many components, have several components. Again, I've offered some conditions that are in direct response to comments you have made, direction I have received from you. The certificate of appropriateness, the commission's action is final. There is an opportunity for appeal. That would only go to the City Council if it was appealed. So hopefully that explains the process a little bit better, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right.
So Kurt, I would like to ask, or I'm recommending to ask a question to Kathy and then to the petitioners. Is that,
That's fine.
are you guys okay with that, or do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think it's helpful to frame the discussion around the criteria that you've recommended that we consider. And just for the record, I think, so everybody watching television and here knows the chair that we're in and how we're viewing the proceedings and how we'll evaluate the plan to come up with a determination. And so, Kathy, can you please present, you could either read them verbatim, or you could just summarize them and talk about the three that you put in the packet. And then I would ask questions to the petitioners at a high level. Please tell us how you think the current plan and the revised plan meets those criteria and fits those criteria. Specifically, the second one that she's going to mention, which is the consistency of the plan and the various components of it with the historic character of the park. And I think that's time well spent. I think that's strategic. I think that gets to what we're being asked to do, and I think that's how we're going to evaluate the plan, and I think that's time well spent now.
So I understand, Jim, I think that's fine. Is that in the staff report, the conditions that?
Middle paragraph.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so Kathy, do you know, I think she's looking at it now. Are you guys good with that, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Why don't you run us through this, Kathy? That's fine.
Okay, this is on page 2 of the staff report. Again, these are criteria that really came from many discussions with some of you, because this action relates to a request from the City Council for the Commission to review and make a recommendation on the overall plan. And again, just to step back a moment, a master plan is a guiding document. It establishes a framework for decisions going forward, whether it's for a park, the college, or anything else. The condition or the criteria that we're suggesting that you review, that you consider for this overall plan, 1, the master plan is complete and thorough to serve as a guide for future decisions about Forest Park. 2, the master plan presents a vision for Forest Park that is generally consistent with the historic character of the park, appropriately honors the past while planning for the future, and is compatible with the historic district within which it is located. And number 3, the master plan presents a design that appropriately balances the functionality of the park and the desire for enhancement and rehabilitation of the park with the community culture and traditions of the park.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, I guess the questions I would have for the petitioner, we could go through each one of them and maybe start with the second. And I don't know.
Well, Jim, before we do that really quick, I think it's equally important for the public to understand what criteria we cannot consider, or we're not supposed to, I shouldn't say not supposed to, is outside of our purview, if you will. So cover that really quick too, and then we'll be done with Kathy, and then we can, I think, because we don't need any comment on that, let's get that out of the way, and then we can ask the questions. How's that? Thanks.
Be happy to do that.
We're just engineering the meeting as we go.
Okay. And I would just make a comment that the commission in past petitions has recognized that your role is narrow. You are the Historic Preservation Commission. you have recognized that the city council or other boards have much broader purview. For instance, and these aren't intended to be necessarily all of the criteria that the city council or other boards might consider, but just a suggestion of what might be considered. For the council's purview, but not the commission's, is the cost of construction and the cost implications of ongoing maintenance. How the integrity of the master plan will be assured going forward as construction plans are developed and construction gets underway. You can certainly stress the importance that there be something in place, but whether or not it happens is really outside of your control. An interest in maintaining or changing the types or intensity of uses that occur in the park. If, for instance, and I don't want to start rumors, but if, for instance, the city council decided something very different should occur in this park, that would not be your decision. That would be a discussion with the Park and Recreation Board and ultimately the city council. Political implications are positions of various interested parties. That's why, as all of you received your phone calls and emails, you appropriately redirected them to staff so that we could make sure all of you received the same information. You refrain from being lobbied. The city council's in a different position. They have constituents, they're elected, and they play a different role. Appropriateness of the process undertaken. Particularly with the piece that is a recommendation on the plan, the council made the choice to direct this to you. You, as a commission, have clearly followed. All of your meetings have been noticed. We've posted notices. We've mailed notices repeatedly. So the appropriateness of the process, whether to send this to you, was really the council's decision. And then finally, personal opinion. As all of you know, you're not up here to state whether you like a project or not like a project, and you deal with this every time you meet, but instead to really look at your role as the Historic Preservation Commission and evaluate whether what's before you is consistent with your charge.
Okay.
Now,
Yeah.
if you will.
And so those three criteria, it's thoroughness of the plan, it's consistent with the historic character of the park, and that it balances functionality and the desire to enhance and rehabilitate the park. I mean, do you have any guidance on weighting of those criteria? Because as an HPC member, I kind of look at the second one, right, as maybe 65% of our purview, and in terms of importance, they're probably not all equal, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are there.
Keep in mind that this is, the city council could have simply approved a master plan for Forest Park. There's no requirement that the plan itself come before you. The council's asking for your opinion. So no, I think you have to, and maybe even establishing these criteria, they aren't meant to be established, but to give you a framework. So I don't think, I'm certainly not in a position to say one should be weighted more than other. It's the whole context of the plan. Is this a plan that can appropriately serve as a guide for future decisions? It's not the be-all, end-all. Okay. The plan itself doesn't authorize anyone to begin digging or construction or anything in the park tomorrow. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So I guess, Frank, the first question on the first criteria is, how thorough do you think the plan is? If the city staff took it from your computer today and they were working on it 5 years from now, do you think there'd be a good guide, or do you feel like there's still more work to be done there?
I think there's certainly construction documents to be performed, which will give us a lot more detail, and that would be the document that we would hope would be followed in the future. So then the next step for us, after approvals from this board and city, a recommendation from this board and city council, would be to go to construction documents. And I think that would be the guiding light for the project.
Okay. And, I mean, do you think this will, but as it stands now, is it going to be referred to?
Yes.
I mean, it's not just going to be forgotten and then
No.
The construction plans are going to go off?
All the documentation that you have would be referred to, absolutely.
Okay. And then the second question I would have on the second criteria, which I think the most important, is maybe you could go through each element of the plan and just comment on how consistent it is with the character of the park based on its history. And I think you could ask Art, other folks on the committee, it's not to you, but that's really the nub of this issue. Mm-hmm. And I think presenting the elements in the context of the consistency, low, medium, and high, across the elements of the plan, I think is is good for us to hear, and I think, at least for me, that's going to be the basis, a big basis of a decision.
I think it's a great question, and I do agree with you. It's probably time for me to defer.
Yeah.
Art and Gail Hodges have been guiding lights for us, along with Michael and his group, so I'm going to ask Gail to come up and maybe touch on those points.
Okay.
I think you know from my comments at earlier meetings that beginning with the report of the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, subcommittee for the Forest Park Board, the recommendation came forward that the approach should be rehabilitation. Rehabilitation in the context of looking at this park and its history as a passive park, not one for swing sets, not one for baseball diamonds, none of that stuff. For there, the enjoyment of nature and the focus on what has always been the primary focus at Forest Park, the lake, the native woods, and the environment there. We have to face it that way back in 1857, they could have put a park anywhere. Those were prime lots. These were real estate people putting Lake Forest together, and they could have sold those lots for big money if they wanted to. Instead, they set it aside for a park. When we look at rehabilitation, that is defined, and I feel, having previously worked with the Building Review Board when it reviewed all the historic preservation petitions, that it's very important to look at this project in the context of the definition of rehabilitation, and that is what the committee did. It's defined as the act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving those portions or features which convey its historical or cultural values. In the case of this park, the historical and cultural values which still remain are, of course, the incredible venue there, the road, which is approximately in the position where it was originally constructed, as documented by the only proof we have of where it was, and that's the 1911 survey. It's also what remains of the native landscape, and there's been a lot of attention in this plan in restoration of the native landscape. We're not talking about here about restoration. That applies to restoring a landscape to a particular period of significance, because we have other issues here. We have issues of how this is going to be used in 21st century Lake Forest and beyond. My understanding always has been, and I've been involved with historic preservation since moving here, shortly after moving here in 1976, and definitely since 1977, it's not to freeze our community at a particular place in time and never change, but it's to look at when changes come before us, and I'm sure you all understand this, to ensure that they are compatible with the overall environment, because the community will change if we don't change. In some ways, we all know this, the community will die or become a museum, and we're not in a great position to become a museum. We're not also talking about pure preservation, although preservation is involved in rehabilitation, because preservation would mean that way back from 1896, nobody would have changed anything from that time forward. And we all know a lot of change has taken place in this park, a lot of it ad hoc over time. Even before the park was laid out by Simons, 1893, there were people playing golf on this land, and we all know you can't play much golf if it's a forest of trees. So we know there was a lot of clearing there to begin with. And it's not reconstruction, the whole place hasn't disappeared, and we're not trying to put it back together again according to a place and time. I think it's also important within this context, and the committee looked at this very carefully, and that is the recommendation in brief 36 of the National Park Service, which defines parameters for the 4 possible treatments of historic properties, of which rehabilitation is one. Brief 36 was written by Charles Birnbaum for the U.S. Department of Interior. He is the founder and president of the Cultural Landscape Foundation. In that statement, it says false historification in every treatment should be avoided. This applies to individual features as well as the entire landscape. Examples of inappropriate work include the introduction of historic-looking benches that are actually new design, a fanciful gazebo placed in what was once an open meadow, executing an unrealized historic design. In other words, you might have a piece of open land and you said, gee, here's this plan, let's build it now, 100 years later. Or designing a historic-looking landscape for a relocated historic structure where you'd move a building onto as a site and then decide what you're going to do with the site. So all of those things were considered. If we look at the components, which as they stand right now, and the major components, the ring road follows the general outline of Simon's plan. It has modifications, as Cliff Miller has described, to accommodate the required pedestrian path and to draw the road back a bit as appropriate to minimize the impact on the bluff and accommodate the path. My understanding is that the road and the path together are approximately the same width as the present road. The parking on the ring road, again, eases in parking spaces. This is a change for current needs. The committee believes it is within the parameters of being appropriate. The pedestrian paths and the Belvedere Landing, again, there is a need expressed by the city and by a number of residents who've come forth that there needs to be some kind of a pedestrian path. The challenge here was how to accommodate that in the space available, how to accommodate it within the framework of the kind of design or space that originally existed there when Simons drew his plat of park. One thing about that plat, it's very difficult to know exactly how much of it is a drawing of what was there to begin with, and there are then suggestions, but it's not saying this is a blank map and we're going to put in all these trees, and we don't know how much was originally cleared or whatever. So it's important to look at those paths within that context. The Belvedere Landing is something entirely new. It is a functional element from my perspective, and the committee spent a great deal of time talking about this. There is a lot of wear and tear on the bluff in that area. It's a high-use area, and the idea was to try to make it more functional, have less impact on the bluff, but also blend it again with the landscape. I think it's important to look at a couple of things with the use of stone in this, and we talked a lot about it on the committee. And that is that, first of all, it weathers, it becomes part of the landscape. There are contexts for it on the beach, which is more recent, but more importantly, throughout our town. The amenities, we've had a lot of discussion about that on the committee. And others may not particularly agree with the way I may phrase this, but I have to say that I personally have come around from looking at the hodgepodge of amenities that we have now, and my perspective is that is not good for this park. It is not in the mode of keeping nature dominant in the park, which was Simon's intent. And we have to go back to the original. There's no designation of benches or lights or picnic tables or any of that in the original plan. And there's not a great deal of evidence until more recent times of any of these things. The lights we know were put in the 1930s. There were no gas lights ever in the park. Some people seem to have thought this, but that is not true. There were all kinds of several assorted benches that we see in old photographs, one made of old logs put together, some with spindly, wiry connections and so on. So the committee, in considering this, was looking how can it ultimately blend with nature, which is the dominant feature historically of the park? How can it provide a relatively maintenance-free set of amenities, which will ultimately save the city from having to cart things in every year, refinish them and whatever. So I think that is pretty much covers all of these areas. If there are other questions, I would attempt to answer them. I think you've probably received some definitions and so on that I did on background and rehabilitation standards and whatever, but I'd be happy to answer questions. I will say, as a historic preservationist, I can tell you there has been a lot of very serious discussion about these matters on the committee. It is not taken lightly. This is a treasured site in our community. It needs special care. I think that within the community, we may have differences on approach, but what I think we have always regarded as primary here is the site, the lake, the views. You have had, I think, in your packet and in the report of the Historic Preservation Committee, some aerial shots that were taken in 1939. Probably that's about 35 years or so, maybe 40 years after the road was laid out, and where we have the proof from the 1911 survey. If you look at those and compare them to the original plan, there is a lot more open space in 1939, so something was happening there. Somebody took out trees, maybe they were not there to begin with. Nobody really knows, but looking at that, there are a lot more open view sheds. I would hope that you all too would refer to the original Simons plan, which the committee and the architect looked at very carefully. Those measurements were studied in the Historic Preservation Advisory Committee, and I personally did crawl all over the map. The Simons view sheds range from 75 feet to 150 to 200 feet. So they're really, the plan as you've got it is pretty consistent with that. Depends on where you take it, but there were short view sheds and long ones. So that all has also been considered in the planning. I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them.
That's great, thank you.
Art Miller may have some.
Any other questions?
No.
So
Just
Gail, that was a really nice job. Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
just very briefly, but to talk about how this fits into the plan of how all the different points in the ordinance for compatibility come in. One thing that I'm probably stretching when we talk about height, which isn't listed as one of the criteria you're going to look at, I'd see this as a negative height thing. It's a void with solids on either side of it. It's the organizing principle for the community. It was placed first here. It was the longest open space along the lake. It was because of the park being there, they put the station where it is. They followed Deerpath and Westminster on either side of the station down that way. There used to be a road that went through the middle of the campus and connected with, from College Road to connect with Spring Lane. So you came at it from all these three things, and your arrival at the park was very important. And how does this impact the things that we're talking about? You should be able to see without having things at a height very much above what you're sitting, when you're sitting on a bench, what height you would achieve. That should be open vista with interruptions for some of the, to kind of make it more interesting. But basically, when you arrive there, it's like your eyes go from the very narrow shape of that one historic photograph we have of Spring Lane where there's the Farwell Place on the left. Your eye is very close, and then you enter the park area, and all of a sudden you have peripheral vision taking you in all that open space. That's a very important effect, and that's one of the reasons why we're also passionate about this park, is because of that very visceral experience we have when we reach that space. So the extent to which we keep things very low, as this plan does, and in fact grounded, these amenities, from water fountains to lights to everything, are not on spindly little stalks. They are grounded in something solid so that they seem to come out of the ground. And there's a little bit of a rhythm to those across that vista. So I think that that's meeting a very key criterion here of what you're trying to accomplish. But going beyond those, I think if you look at certainly the kinds of points that we would make about rhythm, about compatibility. When we talk about compatibility, we have to think about the larger historic district, which is really most of that. Most of the 1857 plan is included now in historic district. Not all of it, but most of it. And this is the focus of that historic district. And so we think about this in terms of that whole, not just the details. And so I think it's points like compatibility inside that district for materials, compatibility inside that district for the kind of rhythm that you see. And so in the plantings, we're seeing that. In the movement from the open space to the much narrower space when you're going south from Spring Lane, toward the parking lot. You narrow down, you have the lower height lights, and you're feeling like you're in a different kind of an experience again. And then when you come out into the parking lot, instead of reaching open asphalt, you'll actually be in more of a forested feeling area. So what the landscape architect is doing here is managing the view as you arrive at the site, as you proceed through the site, and then as you then exit the site going back down to the parking. Obviously, cars, as much as they're moving through not too rapidly, but moving through, they don't distract from this too much. If they park a lot in these, and especially in the viewpoints, so that seems to be addressing that in here. If you can get them off of those main viewpoints, you're making a big difference about how this is perceived as you arrive at the park and your sense of awe at what you see ahead of you. So I think that several of the criteria that that you have before you are being addressed in this plan, enough that it makes it easy to see this as a very successful and appropriate approach after 3 years of discussion and very responsive by the landscape architectural firm and the people involved in the project to make this a good way to step forward. The plan that's offered in the staff report, which allows for overall conceptual approval of the plan, but bringing back every element of it for further review, gives you the power to continue to have purview over this. So that's not being taken away from you. It isn't an up or down today on every element. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Art, I just have one follow-up, and sure. Gail, this could be to you as well. I mean, do you see anything in the plan that you just see really inconsistent with the character of the park or the history of the town, based on all of your knowledge? I mean, there's something that you think is, the tension is very high between historical character and preservation and increased functionality?
I have to say cars, but.
No, I mean, well, that's it. I mean, I asked you the question because I want to get your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is cars. But I understand that it's the public will to not deal with that at this point, or at any point, but to keep the cars on the roads. But that is, to me, the thing that's not otherwise being dealt with. And it's being managed appropriately in this plan. But I would be on the way far over side of
I think I perhaps need to explain why I have come around to look at the amenities in a different way. I think that it's very important to look at the scale of this site. It is 10 acres. It is almost 3,200 linear feet along that bluff. It's not somebody's backyard. So that wherever the amenities end up, and it may well be that they will still be proposed with stone and wood, but perhaps be on a somewhat finer scale, because we're talking essentially about, sketches of ideas right now. But I think within the context, when you have something that's going to weather, that is natural material and blends with it, when you look at it in the scale of this site, I personally have come to say, I think it's appropriate because it is going to have minimal visual impact, rather than, ta-da, here's the black and varnished wood bench, or here's the totally black wrought iron bench standing out there. Instead, it'll be part of the general natural scene. And perhaps because I'm involved with some environmental issues too, I've come to that perspective, but I think that it is appropriate within the historic context. For one person's opinion, that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? I'd like to move to public testimony, but if you have...
I just have a couple of questions.
Please.
On the master plan on page 24, you're still showing the north spur. I know it's been removed in other areas of the master plan, but it hasn't been removed from that. I'm worried that there's going to be an inconsistency in the master plan, leaving the north spur of the pathway there.
Yeah, the
Can that
northern
be
spur.
changed out, or is...
The northern spur, the northern spur we're talking about is the area that comes off of that northernmost part of the road into that northern forest, correct?
The pathway.
The pathway.
Right.
Can you go to that?
We're talking about just the dead-end path.
Yeah, the dead-end path
Yes.
on,
Yeah,
that's
we're-
what you're talking about removing, correct?
Correct. We're still making some editorial changes to it. We put a lot of this together in the last week since the Park and Rec meeting.
Okay,
But we will make those changes,
if we
yes.
should approve this or recommend approval, that can be removed from,
Yes.
so there's consistency.
Correct, that area in red is being removed,
Okay.
yes.
Well, I just noticed it still is on page 24.
We will make a note of that.
Um,
My editorial staff wasn't really,
yeah, that line, I understand. In the master, in your letter to us, when you talked about the changes, you talked about transitioning the amenities into the park, and the staff gave us their report in which they use the same language about transitioning the amenities. Now, your transition of amenities and the staff's transition of amenities differs
Correct.
significantly.
yes.
Okay.
In hindsight, after reading the staff's recommendation, I probably would have used the word phasing. And it was our intention, not a transition of material, but a phasing of the amenities. I think our original plan had somewhere around 22 benches on it, and I think we've now down to 11 benches. So it would be a phasing of the benches, not to, to make sure we get them in the park, to view it, get public comments on it, and then move forward after that.
And where are we at as far as the picnic tables, which, seem to be the bulkiest of the amenities that you're proposing?
I think we've also eliminated,
They're on the phase.
yeah, they're a phasing in process too, that we wouldn't put all the picnic tables in. We'd start out with one table and kind of move it from there.
Kathy, I had a question about one of your recommendations. Let me see if I can find it here. Under the conditions for the recommendation of the Certificate of Appropriateness. Let's see. No, of course I can't find it. Alter the, number 2, under the bluff walk, it says alter the west path according to link to reduce overall path system. What exactly did the staff mean by that?
The two conditions listed in that area were in response to the commission's discussion, what I think I heard, concern about whether the path system as proposed was too extensive. I think there was some suggestion that, and there has been some response, the north spur was removed, but I think if I was reading the commission's concerns correctly, there was some discussion about further reducing the path system. And if that bluff walk was in fact reduced, then it might be appropriate to adjust that west path as well. So that was an effort to respond. If there's gonna be some reconfiguring, you wanna look at it as a whole as opposed to just clipping off one piece.
Okay, so there wasn't any specific alteration in mind, just trying to pick up on concerns of commissioners from previous meetings?
Yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for right now.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Fred.
Yes, reference back to page 24 again, there is a photograph in the bottom left-hand corner identified as a granular walkway. And my question is, it may well be that this picture is one that's available because it was taken somewhere where there was a granular walkway, but the view of the appearance of it differs quite a bit from the material that was shared with us, was passed around at the joint meeting that we had 2 weeks ago with the Park and Rec Board. Namely, a very attractive material was passed around, which is of darker hue, and I think would blend in a very more subtle way with the landscape than does this white looking pathway that's in the document on page 24. My question is, does this supersede what was passed around, or is it the other way around?
It's the other way around. The samples that you were shown are the same materials that we're moving forward in our plan with. That picture is just showing the concept of a granular path. It doesn't represent the material well. We probably should have had one in that does. But what you saw the other night is exactly what we were planning on using.
Thank you.
All right, I have one other question, Ralph. This appendix to the interim report, this is part of the master plan, right?
Yeah.
That's correct, okay.
Yeah.
Because this is the document that has the history of
Correct.
Simons and the plan, so
Yeah.
just, it's hard to tell in this master plan if this is the appendix it's referring to or not, but as long as it is, that's the, yeah.
It is,
Okay.
that will be in the appendix.
Yeah, that's great.
And will be part of the plan that is kept, and that whole document, as I understand it, will then be used to evaluate the consistency of construction drawings or amenities as this goes forward.
Terrific. Well, we've come a long way. We've had lots of meetings on this. This is our first time we've actually been asked to make a ruling on this, so I'm anxious to continue the meeting, get the public testimony out so that we can deliberate and make a ruling. Any other questions before I do that? All right, we'll ask if there is any public testimony on this petition.
Seeing none?
Say no? I see none. You were going to make a comment?
I was just gonna say, you might wanna clarify, as you did with the petitioner, that you're looking
Yeah.
for public comment on the responses,
Yeah,
in
thanks.
particular to the response.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kathy. The concept in keeping the public testimony open was not to belabor the meeting. We've heard a lot of very pertinent comments from all factions, and so I assure you we haven't forgot any of those. But we are interested in any new information, any information that's particular to the changes that are being made or the conditions that have been made, and or suggested by staff, and really, I think that's it. So, sure, come on up, please introduce yourself, and I think there's one behind you, Jenny. Thanks. You could be next.
Hi, Jan Gibson, 59 East Franklin Place. Just as windows, doors, and roof lines make or break a house, along with other major factors, so do landscape designs and amenities with parks. At the last meeting on May 3rd, we heard about the term false history. If you accept these stone amenities, just like a modern window thrust into a classically designed house, you too are setting the stage for your own false history. In private conversation last week with Barbara Geiger, the author of a recent O.C. Simons book, I asked if O.C. Simons used stone in his parks. No, she said. He may have used rocks as a gate, or as Dean Schaefer, a landscape architect who put together the National Register nomination for all of the Simons parks, one near Dixon, where the gate was. He's not really known for any stonework design. You will not find stone around the southern end of Lake Michigan. Just ask anyone who sails. If you run aground, you'll hit mud or possibly sand, but not rock. The geological Canadian Shield with its granite starts far up north, and you'll not find much land and stone furniture in parks, and certainly not in O.C. Simon parks. Stone makes a false history of this area. In addition, all the stonework in this plan seems, I think, contrived. We have stone benches, modern bollard lighting, replacing our wonderful lighting that we see in town, drinking fountains, picnic tables. Just try to move one of those benches after it's installed. The park is 116 years old and has classical nature to it. Modern-looking stone really doesn't fit. The hodgepodge that Gail talked about that's there now can certainly be done differently and should be. Bob Kiley once told me that there are volumes of bench catalogs around. I'm sure we can look somewhere to find something appropriate. This false history will open the doors for further false history additions. We don't want that. It's inappropriate for Forest Park to display any type of stone. We need to honor its past and keep its integrity for the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Virginia McTeer, 975 Kirkhill Lane. 4 years ago, the city requested from the Lake Forest Garden Club a master landscape design plan of Forest Park as their centennial year gift to the Lake Forest community. Working together, city staff and Garden Club members hired a renowned landscape architect, Stephen Simpson, to develop a conceptual master plan respecting the O.C. Simons 1896 design and rehabilitating the park with a view toward the future. Through the years, trees have died, the bluff is eroded, the stairs need repair, and parking was added in the mid-1980s when the beach was restored. We need to replace some of the trees, fix a bluff and stairs, and remove the parking on the ring road except for a few handicap places to park just to the north of Spring Lane. As a result, the view will not be obstructed from Deerpath Road to Lake Michigan. The ring road was built as a carriage drive before cars were invented, and we had horse and buggies driving on it to view Lake Michigan. Simons believed in open spaces, and the revised plan, led by the Forest Park Project Board, has evolved over the past 2 years and is an amazing one today. Cliff Miller and his horticulture committee, consisting of people like Craig Bergman, Mariani, Julie Prieb, and others, have spent innumerable hours on this project. It is time to go ahead and approve this plan. Private groups working with the city to raise money for the Forest Park project have found that their costs have been increasing as we sit around and discuss how to proceed. The residents of Lake Forest have certainly received a lot of information about what has been suggested to improve Forest Park, and they have given the Forest Park Board wonderful ideas which have been implemented. As the HPC knows, the city will check on lighting, benches, trash cans, water fountains, bike racks, and other things to make sure that they are in compliance with their rules. I hope that tonight the Historic Preservation Committee will vote unanimously for the Forest Park project to be approved. We are following the 1998 Historic Preservation Ordinance and should go back to the 1857 Almer and Hotchkiss plan of Lake Forest for our famous city park, which uses Lake Michigan as a focal point of his 1,200-acre town plan of this beautiful 10-acre park.
Thank you. Anyone else, please? Please. There's someone getting up, Kenny.
I'm Christine Sequeira at 540 North Mayflower. And I say that it is true, recently there have been too many trees just planted anywhere. There could have been a better plan in regard to this. That much I agree with. Also, I have a letter from the grandson of Richard J. Simons, dated May 15th, 2012. He lives at 275 West Manson Highway in Chelan, Washington. And it says, regarding the plan of Forest Park, Lake Forest, Illinois, to whom it may concern, I understand that there is a visceral contest going on concerning the redoing of a landscaping plan that was the work of my grandfather. Not knowing the details for this proposed change, I call attention to the history of the work of O.C. Simons and how it stood the test of time. Some of the projects that he has taken on you may be familiar with, as they still exist today, and they are Lincoln Park Addition, Morton Arboretum, Lyle, Armour Estates, Lake Forest, Dixon Park System, Illinois, President Reagan's hometown, the Lake Forest Cemetery, the Graceland Cemetery of Chicago, Chicago Golf Club, Glenview Golf Club in Gulf, Illinois, Fort Sheridan, Montrose Cemetery in Chicago, the Indian Hill Club, Winnetka, and Lake Forest College. And there are many more estates in Lake Forest that have been designed by him. Also, he designed Iowa State University campus, the University of Chicago campus, the University of Maryland campus, the Lilac Garden of Marquette Park. O.C. Simons created over 1,000 landscapes during his career. Above are listed some of the projects of which you may be aware. If the proposed plans eliminate this park, one would hope the current park is reviewed from a historical aspect before going any further. You may come to the conclusion that the existing park is a treasure to be protected. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a queue going. That's okay. You guys fight it out.
Hi, guys. Jimmy? Bob Pasquazi, 172 Washington Road. I'm here only for myself. I want to get something off of my mind. I used to run the beach concession when there was no beach at this town. I don't think people even realize that there used to be a building in the bluff down there. The road, the sidewalk that goes down, there was a building sitting in that bluff that I proposed to remodel and keep that as a concession stand that I would have had there. And they said it was not well worth doing it. I wish it were there now. One other thing that I say about the place, I go for whatever's going on. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against anything. Excepting this, that if that thing had been kept manicured the way they do around this city hall, Botanic Gardens would be visiting us. They let it go to pot. Look at the bluff. You got trees that have been standing down that fell down 10 years ago. I think we're getting a ride.
Thank you.
We've got to stop meeting like this. This has gone on way too long. I would like a clarification on something that was said at the beginning of this meeting about getting information and comments to commissioners and aldermen. I've always understood from talking with them that you could mail them, email them, call them on the phone directly, no problem with that. I had the understanding that that's no longer the way business should be conducted. That's not right. The residents should have direct access to their representatives, which are the commissioners and the aldermen. If we have to go through City Hall, everybody should be made aware of that, because that's a new twist. I carefully put out 4 pages. I hope you all were able to read them. I hope that wasn't stifled. I've done the same thing to the aldermen, sent it directly to them, so I was sure they would get it. I'd be very upset if residents can't get direct comments to commissioners and aldermen. With that said, I'm not going to go over what my comments were there. This is a concept plan. It doesn't come close to being a master plan. It is so inconsistent and incomplete. I've been a practicing planner and designer for over 40 years, and I'd be embarrassed to submit this document to you. It just doesn't do it, no matter what you say about the aesthetics of certain elements. I would recommend that this be sent back again and people really look at it, really look at some options of which none have ever been presented, and that's a shame. There has been so little collaboration between the community and the architect and the board. A lot of good ideas missed, not considered. A lot of options that might have brought this all together in a consensus. No one's going to like everything. Never happens. That's fine. I think everyone understands that. But this process has been so misguided, so misconducted, that it's dragged on for this length of time. Doesn't have to happen. But the desire now at the end to push this through, boy, we're going to live with this. And all the people in the future are going to live with this. Don't make the mistake. If we need to take more time, boy, now is the time to do it. Because what is proposed will bring irrevocable damage to that site. It's unique terrain. It's nationally, historically important. It's had some notable people, and they didn't get to be notable by putting out a bunch of crap for years and years and years. So let's not bow to some of the pressure to meet the needs of specific groups. That's not fair to the community. The reason that this has dragged on, one of the reasons, is a lot of concerned people keep hanging in there, and for very good reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public testimony? Please come on up.
Good evening. Rami Lopat, 410 East Woodland Road. This rushed approval process and the Swiss cheese of what is supposed to be a comprehensive plan boggle my mind. You know, we would not have needed to debate the aesthetic of this plan at all if the city and the Garden Club had waited to hire a landscape architect until after the HPC had determined goals and design guidelines, as well as choosing between restoration and rehabilitation 3 years ago or more. Looking back, I would have fought harder for restoration. I think it should still be our aim to create an alternative, simple restoration plan which also restores our credibility as the city that stands for preserving its historic visual character above all else. I hope you notice that page 2 of this plan reads, quote, that Hotchkiss and Simon's landscape gardening philosophies are the organizing framework for rehabilitating the park. But I also hope that you notice that the goals on page 4 of the plan do not bother to mention Hotchkiss and Simon's. We go from there with inconsistencies and disingenuous statements. I will note that there were a few attempts at reconciling the aesthetic of contemporary Stimson with that of picturesque Simon's, but there really is just no way to do this. This is not compatible with the East Lake Forest Historic District or a forest park itself, a National Register property. I would like to have been able to prepare a full presentation to you, page by page, to ask about discrepancies, landscape motifs, safety concerns, shrub choices, and those pesky stone picnic tables, and how doggy-doo containers will be made from stone. 3 minutes have never been enough. I have not had time to adequately review the last plan or these changes, much less anything that's changed in the last few days, and I think the public is entitled to that due process. I think I am not alone in not understanding that certificates of appropriateness would be heard or voted on tonight. In fact, I think my written letters ask that you ask that significant alterations to landforms be also included to your COA criteria. What has been said about it was very confusing and obscure to me. By the way, I wanted to know if there's a new application for a COA that I might be given, because the last one I saw was in January 2010. This planning process was inclusive. Only a few agreed with it. And you should know that I did agree, in large part, with the Historic Preservation Subcommittee's report, of which I was an author. We said, for example, that amenities that conveyed a contemporary appearance should be avoided. Since it was a draft report, I naturally felt that elements that we left open to debate, such as paths, would come back to us. But alas, that did not happen. A meeting of our subcommittee has not been called since March 2011. If we had kept meeting, we might have been able to vet the plan and spare everyone this ordeal. 5 of our 7 subcommittee members were not asked to write or review whatever material Gail Hodges and Art Miller just submitted to you, even though Mr. Gesualdo's report says that he asked us to. I do disagree with the Landscape Subcommittee's conclusion that any landscape motif could be used and would be appropriate. Back in 2010, Parks Director Mary Van Arsdale came in for a certificate of appropriateness on this very plan. She told the HPC, the intent of the master plan is to integrate O.C. Simon's vision with the needs of today so that visitors will wonder where the original park left off and the current enhancements began. I think almost everyone will be able to tell where the new enhancements begin if this plan is approved. Very, very regrettably, I say that this plan does not qualify for your endorsement or approval. Stay strong, HPC. Take your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
My name is Prue Beidler, and I live at 20 South Stonegate Road. I have stood before you and the Parks and Rec Board several times and talked about how much pleasure I get taking my grandchildren to Forest Park, and so I won't say that because that's not new. But what I will talk about is something I know very, very well, because I was co-president of the Market Square project, and some of us probably don't even remember when that was done. That project started in 1997 and continued until about 2002. The reason I bring it up tonight is that it's been mentioned both in the written materials and by a number of other people as a model that's useful going forward. When we created that private-public partnership, in spite of the fact that the city of Lake Forest had had partnerships with private bodies since its inception, we had not done one on the scale that we were doing in Market Square. And we certainly had not, in recent history, done one that was so sort of obvious. And everybody thought of Market Square as their front yard. And we certainly had lots of discussion. There was definitely controversy. But we had a process that was very deliberate and had a great deal of integrity. And it was very clear. There was a very clear timetable in the beginning. We had to do the same things we'll have to do with this process. We had to create a plan. We had a wonderful landscape architect, in that case Rodney Robinson. We had a wonderful board. The Garden Club gave the gift of the plan to the city, Lake Forest Garden Club, just as has happened in this case. And then a 501c3 board, similar to what's happening now, took over the execution of the project. The process was clear. There were always people who didn't agree with what we were doing. There's no question. That's always going to happen in this community. But I have to tell you, as someone who sat on that board, led that board, and is now sitting on this Forest Park Project board, I am absolutely knocked out by the quality of the people serving. I'm knocked out by their background on the very commissions that you are sitting on. The service to the city has been proven by the people sitting on this board to a person. Some of them in more formal ways, some of them less formally, like my service to Market Square. But there is no question that this is a group that is committed to doing the right thing by this city, and they have demonstrated that time again in previous times in their lives. It's also a group that's a group of volunteers, and I have to say, I want to be completely candid with you. I think this group needs the sense that this is going to go forward. I've been tasked by Ralph. He always references me as the fundraiser in chief. We can't do anything about fundraising until this thing gets going. We just can't do it. You can't raise money for something that hasn't been approved. So it's time. And I say it's time because I've been through an identical process before with Market Square. We need to understand there will always be people who don't agree. And I don't impugn their motives. I think everybody gets to have their own views on this. And I think we've been very respectful of those views. I do not agree that this has not been a good public process. So apparently we even have difference of views on how public the process has been. But from my perspective, having done this before with Market Square, and once again now, this is as good a process as we've had. And I'll tell you, this is pretty much the most fantastic group of volunteers I've ever worked with. I can't imagine the city ever expecting a better board to assemble than the one that's sitting mostly here tonight and serving on the Forest Park Project Board.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, please. Oh, there's one more behind you there, Craig, and then I'm starting to get to know everybody on a first-name basis.
Hello. Pauline Moore, 2000 Knollwood Road. I just have a question, and it's a real question. I don't know the answer to it, and I don't know if you can find the answer to it. But if and when this proposed plan is implemented, will the park still qualify for listing on the National Register?
Well, I don't know the answer, but the audience seemed to have known that one. So, Craig, please. Thanks.
Craig Bergman, 900 North Waukegan Road, Lake Forest. I've been an active part of the Horticulture Advisory Committee relating to the park, and it's been an incredible process of dedication and education for me. And I think that what Prue had just mentioned, you know, the dedication of the entire Forest Park group, it's amazing. And we don't want the park wrecked either. I think that the whole concept of a master plan has to be understood by particularly you folks at this point, is that it's thematic. It's not supposed to be specific. It's supposed to be a plan for the guidance of the details and the construction detailing like Art had spoken of. So for us to get bogged down on picnic tables and not allow for a master plan to keep going, it's short-sighted. I mean, the aspect of a master plan being inclusive of the tableland and the ravine with local representatives like John, Cliff, and myself horticulturally, I think you need to know that we're not going to let the planning plan be any less scrutinized than what we've already gone through with the master planning process of it. We are professionals that have to get to a thematic aspect like this master plan is before we can get into the details, before we can get into the expensive things, before we can get into whether it's this tree, that tree, this grass, that grass, mown, not mown. I think conceptually the plan is really wonderful. I think it actually transitions the park from being a leftover process that's been just kind of accumulated over time. And really, it's a lot like a typical North Shore yard. I mean, different owners have decided to do what they want to do. And somebody, and it has to be our community, has to take responsibility for what the next event or the guidance of the growth of this park is going to be. And I think the master plan does a great job of that. So, but stay tuned. None of us are going anywhere. We're Lake Forest residents, and we've got our opinions. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public testimony? All right, I think going once, going twice. Closed. Well, folks, what do you think? It's on us now.
Well, I'll start off by saying it's been quite a process. And we haven't actually been plugged into it continuously through it. We've seen it more sporadically at the beginning, I believe, and with greater frequency now near the end, of course. Maybe from an overview standpoint, I've been greatly in favor of this whole concept of enhancing the actual view of the lake. I think it's always been something that's been lacking, so I really appreciated that from the beginning. There were a lot of changes made to the plan in the beginning, from taking the cars out to putting them back in, but the overall idea of allowing a view of the lake as one of the major features has been something that almost seems like it's so logical that it didn't even need discussing. And yet I think that actually was an issue that has really turned around. I think I remember a great deal of opposition to that, and that has been one of the things that's really dissipated, and I'm really glad to see that. The notion that we could possibly have some possible parking spots is much appreciated on my behalf, and I lobbied myself for that, and I did so because in my early years on the BRB and HPC, sometimes I would go easy on things I thought were important because I didn't want to make too much of a pest to myself, and then sure enough I sort of learned that I regretted maybe not making the point a little more definitively. So I think I did my best, and I respect that it's at least just accomplished a dotted line, but I understand that that's actually important, because if the city determines later on we need it, I really think it's great that it's been positioned in a way that you feel comfortable with, so that, you know, it's not just haphazardly decided on. I mean, that's great for us to do, and a master plan is a place to do that. The path system has been debated back and forth, and I think that the process has been, I think, important to have happened. Again, once something like this happens, there's really no going back. I think a lot of the different issues to do with that path have been brought forward, and we've had a chance to really digest it. And with regard to that, I think that it's been resolved to where I feel comfortable moving that ahead to City Council. I'm not yet really comfortable with the amenities as far as I guess what I'd have to call it's maybe their design language, and perhaps as a designer myself, I might be guilty of being a little bit too sensitized to what those things communicate to me. It's a heck of a time for me to come to that conclusion after operating on that basis for a while on these boards, but I think it's important because as a painting does, as a lot of great things do, you subliminally, if not consciously, react to that item or object, and I don't think we're there yet with these things. It may just be a matter of they're the hand of the artist, and you can't ask a person to design other than the way they do. You're really designing yourself. I just don't find that the language those things emit makes me think of Lake Forest. I guess I could put it that way, as how I would like that to be related to City Council, as far as being of any value and as far as my abilities to kind of contribute. Everything that particularly this evening, I heard from Art about the low profile, the heft, what those do to contribute to the room. Everything you said is exactly right, yet when I look at those pieces stylistically, that could take a vast array of interpretation. And that doesn't mean we go pick it out of a catalog either. I think it's worthy of further study, and it's important enough that I think I would like to make it a condition if we get to a motion tonight.
Yeah.
So that's basically my preliminary
So
thoughts.
Guy, let me ask you a question on that lines. The staff recommended condition with respect to that is a transitioning of materials from Lake Road, and I think that this was an idea that was born out of our last meeting or maybe a meeting before, the concept being that there is some historic reference for limestone in the city of Lake Forest, and certainly there's, whether it's historic or not, there's a character reference at the beach, because you have these jetties that are stone, you have stone buildings down there, you have stone buildings at the church. So out of context, there's a context for it. It also seems to have some kind of practical application in terms of maintenance and in terms of how you might be able to put a bench on the east side of the path that is actually, you know, serves to, you know, support the path and yet could still be sat on, and you can hang your legs over it. It might be kind of a cool feature. The transitioning concept is that perhaps it can be effective as a solution along the path, particularly on the east side of the path, but maybe all along the east side of the ring road path. And then as you come away from the bluff, you need to start to respect the context of the rest of the city, if you will, thinking about, you know, the references maybe to Market Square or the other kinds of benches, and whether they're Victorian or whether there's something else. Certainly you've got street, you know, gas lamps that are there that are part of the context today. You have all the other city signs, and then you've gonna, in the future, we're not seeing it tonight, but we are gonna see someday signage, and it's hard to imagine the entry signage to this park as a big stone monument, so that'll probably not be, you know, I would hope, not be a stone monument, so that's another element that would be part of that transition. Do you think that that could be effective as a condition, or do you think the condition should be, we really should just look at all of that again? I'm sorry to ask you such a loaded question.
Actually, I think if you're going to look at it again, you look at possibly all of it. I don't really have an issue myself with the materiality selections. I guess it's just how the block of stone gets chiseled out. I think. Maybe that's it. I mean, if I wanted to be simplistic, I'd say I think the stuff right now is too potentially corporate looking, perhaps, and not. I don't want to say modern, but I would think that maybe something that might be a little bit more traditional without the false history application, but somehow, in light of how Lake Forest's predominant architecture and taste seems to favor things that are more identifiable humanistically rather than from the machine aesthetic point of view. I find the furniture and amenities right now to be more tending toward that European avant-garde modernism that's been pervasively kind of affecting our culture, and well, it did quite a few years ago, but I find that there's a little bit of competition with what's being suggested that's coming from that end. And this is getting to be splitting hairs, so I'm basically saying I'm not happy with maybe where it's at, it could be better. And that's just my opinion.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else?
I'd like to comment. Yes, I would concur with Commissioner Berg's comments on the amenities. However, I don't think he was saying this, I don't think that the master plan is flawed because of the particular stylistic feature of and I think those are features that can be developed going forward. I don't think those are issues that should stop the master plan until they come back in 3 years with different benches, for example. I think the overall framework is outstanding, and as more than one speaker, the chair, the president of the board has spoken at our joint meeting about the quality of the people who have been involved, and it was spoken to again tonight by True Beitler, and I think that's evidenced by what has been produced. I think extraordinary talent has been brought to bear, and extraordinary sensitivity to the historic values of Lake Forest. Art Miller has spoken to this, I think eloquently. We heard people speak to the issue of rehabilitation versus restoration. I think the path that's been taken in the development of this plan is one that I concur with. I think it's going to be really a wonderful place for Lake Forest. I think that's what's there today is on the edge of an eyesore, frankly. I mean, the lake is wonderful. No one has hurt the lake yet. The bluff is still wonderful. Just about everything else has deteriorated. And I think what the plan is doing is addressing everything else. And it's going to make it even more wonderful.
You know, I approach this looking at whether, from the HPC perspective, whether the historic character of Forest Park is being changed by the master plan. This is challenging in many respects because the history of the park hasn't been well documented. You know, it's clear that O.C. Simon's plan wasn't fully implemented when he put it out. There's been, you know, incremental changes to the park over time, which has affected the history of the park. So it's very difficult to say at what point in time history has to be preserved. So all I can do is look at the real historic character of the park rather than, you know, nitpick at too many elements. You know, the plan that we're being presented, the master plan we're being presented tonight, is historically not a perfect plan. I think there's probably everybody in this room who has, you know, what, 80 to 100 people, and there'll probably be 80 to 100 opinions about changes that could be made that would make it more historically appropriate. But no plan is going to be perfect, and it's said that the perfect is the enemy of the good. And I think what we have here is a good plan. It's not a perfect plan. I find that historically some things are being reintroduced and rehabilitated in this plan, including the view corridors, the open, the preservation and rehabilitation of the ring road, and the open lawns and landscaping. On the other hand, I see things that, you know, I don't find are historically consistent. That's like the western path system and the furniture that, you know, other commissioners have brought up. But overall, you know, I believe the master plan is a good plan. I think it preserves the historic character of the park. And I think with the recommendations or the conditions that the staff has thoughtfully crafted, I would be in a position to vote to approve the master plan with those conditions this evening. So that's my perspective on it.
Great, great. Jim?
I'd like to, because I'm like the process guy, right?
You're going to
well, no, I think, you know, there's been a couple comments just in the testimony that I think we should just circle back with. I'd like to get your guys, you know, counsel and feedback and things. I heard the term Swiss cheese mentioned, and, you know, I think I guess our first criteria around is this a thorough plan in the spirit of a master plan and where it needs to be based on what stage we are. And I just, let's just talk about that first.
Yeah, I'll throw something out on there.
And I'd like to hear what you guys say, because that's part of our deliberation. I know Kathy has talked to me extensively about concerns, and I have the same concerns that this is shelfware and it sits there to get through the approval process.
Right.
Just like in corporations, right? They put together these great strategic plans and roadmaps, and I got paid to do that for 15, 16 years. And then you go ahead and change the operations, and there's a disconnect between what the implementation guys are doing and the strategy guys that they teed up. Yeah. So I just think the first criteria is how, you know, is that linkage and how well the handoff will be, and will the baton be dropped. And I think as stewards we need to comment on that. So I'd like to get your guys' thoughts.
I really have a comment on that, because for me, the key component of that is this appendix to the interim report, because, you know, all we're really doing is looking back over our shoulder at history here. You know, that's really what we're doing. We have the O.C. Simons plan, we have the biography of O.C. Simons, we have the planning principles of O.C. Simons, and that when somebody 25 years from now has another idea, I want to make sure that's sitting on the shelf with this plan, because there's two kinds of plans. There's like the NASA plan, which is, where you start with the first, titanium chip and we build rockets from that. And then there's this plan, which is specific to this site. And so I think it's good enough that I know there's holes in it, there's gonna be holes in it, and I think Ralph's right, we'll do construction drawings, we'll develop this, that's how it works. But I wanna be able to look over my shoulder always at the rest of this and say, hey, remember this stuff? This is where it all came from, right? And so that's really important, because what's in this document is just how we interpreted this in 2012. In 2017 or 2047, somebody hopefully will still have the benefit of the rest of the history. So as long as that's in it, I'm good. The rest of it's going to come. If we like the plan, if we like the theme of this specific solution, the history is still going to be there. Matter of fact, the next guy might get it better than we do. Who knows? If they've got the background. So I'm good with it. I know there's holes. I know it's not perfect. It's come a long way. I think it's way better than it was when we first saw it. I think that's credit to everybody involved, and so that wouldn't prevent me from approving this.
Yeah, I agree with those comments. Not everything can be anticipated and included in certainly design plans. We can't get down to that level of minutia. And we want anybody who's considering in the future kind of to get the overall idea of what this commission and what the city council is thinking when they approve this master plan. We also have to keep in mind that, in the future, they might not want to follow the master plan. And the master plan, which could be recommended by us today and approved by the city council on Monday, it is possible for future elected officials to change it and say we're no longer going to follow this master plan. So I mean, that's the reality of it. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's the reality.
It's a lot harder to just dismiss the history, though.
It is a lot harder. At least
so you at least have to know about it. So that's why it's great to have.
It gives an idea of what we're thinking. Yeah. But as I pointed out in my comments, what we're thinking, what you're thinking, what Jim's thinking, what I'm thinking, what these other people may be thinking, isn't always consistent. So all we can give is, general.
What else you got?
Okay, no. So I'll give you my feedback on the on the historical consistency in that context, the second criteria, because I asked some questions in the front end of the session, and I took some notes, and I've been thinking about it a little bit. But I mean, it seems like the passivity of the park, you feel like that's well maintained based on.
I think that's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so, but I'll bring concerns up at the end. The Ring Road was a big controversy and an issue, and that's there, and it's been some slight modifications. I think the open space and the native landscape, I mean, I know Cliff, I know that team. I trust that, there's some sketchy history there too, but that's going to be great. The view sheds, I think, are good, and in terms of kind of low, medium, and high, I kind of score it on the medium to high side on the historical character aspect to that. The lighting was phased in the 30s, someone had mentioned, and it's there as part of our fabric. People that have lived here are used to it, accustomed to it, so change is tough, but I can give that a little bit of a pass. The bluff pathway, I always have had a concern around the stability of the bluff. I mean, if you think about like what would make us look really dumb, it would be that this project went forward and the bluff fell down. I mean, literally, like, oh, these guys are talking about benches. I mean, who's that guy, Preschlack? I mean, seriously. I mean, so I think it's we've kind of skated over it, and I'm being facetious because it is serious to try to lighten the mood, so I apologize. But a condition, for me, it's very important around the integrity of the bluff. And there's machines there's all kinds of different things going on. I don't really, from a risk mitigation perspective, I've asked the question a couple times, I just don't know enough about that excavation process and the clearance and the state of the bluff personally You know, you go out there and you look around and you can see trees. But I think that's a big issue that
Well, I
is
think that that's
concerned.
the same issue that we have on any lakefront home that has a bluff, and we do the same thing on those petitions. We rely upon the city engineering staff and the civil engineers to tell us if it's feasible, if it works, if it's appropriate. Certainly, we don't have the expertise to tell them whether that's true or not, and it's obviously a good thing for us to make sure that they're checking, and the staff's charged with that responsibility going forward in any event. You know, the one, probably the you know, from a point of view of, you know, how difficult this is, we're moving cars further away from the bluff for the future, which is probably a positive thing. I think the drainage is probably more, from what we've heard, the testimony is more pertinent to the condition of the bluff in the future than any other aspect, and making sure that the drainage is dealt with appropriately, because it's the long-term wear and tear that seems to be the biggest concern as we, you know. And then the other concern is frankly just construction and how we make sure that we don't park heavy vehicles, stage equipment, big blocks of limestone in piles, you know. So things like, but that's really not our purview. It's staff that has to work to understand that, and, you know, obviously.
Yeah, I know it's our purview, but if we conceptually approve a plan that makes it a problem, then, you know, it's our consequence, right? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't feel that way about it. I think that we've vetted that very thoroughly, and
Kathy?
And if you wanted greater comfort with respect to that, even though, as you said, it is part of what will be done, you could attach a condition in your recommendation to the city council, simply stating something that all appropriate engineering studies should be completed to assure no negative impact to the bluff. It could be that simple to get your concern on record, and the city engineer will be involved, if appropriate, as you said, with homes. If there's concern, a slope stability study for a particular area could be requested. Certainly, we look at construction traffic with every project. We look at silt fencing or tree preservation fencing. If you wanted greater comfort, we could easily craft a condition to address that.
Okay, so.
I do think it's already stated in the master plan.
And if I could just make a comment from my own experience and opinion of the City Lake Forest Engineering Department's approach to ravines and bluffs in general, I would have to say that they're most conservative in their permitting and review of those kinds of technical issues. The protection of the environment in those areas is so considerably looked at in terms of potential, you know, erosions. Or I think we're probably about twice as more concerned with that than the other municipalities along the North Shore. I mean, so from that standpoint, I don't have a lot of reservations. And again, that's my own consideration, but as we talk as a group amongst here, I would offer that to you as a consolation, that we've got a really correct group. And not only that, they only engage with consultants that are high quality, the highest quality as far as I'm concerned. So.
And I like, Kathy, I like that idea, just as put it in a condition. So for me, the bluff pathway, assuming that's all good, it seems to kind of honor the ring road. I mean, you could argue that the ring road by itself is really the masterpiece, but, you know, I think I've come around a little bit to the pedestrian path along that and opening up the view to the lake and the functionality to the community because of that, which is our third criteria. So I'm okay. I mean, I've always had an issue with the west pathway just because it's pristine. It hasn't been, corporatized for 116 years. Cliff, I think, did a really nice job the last session talking about how pavement followed pedestrians, and I feel like we're going counter to that a little bit here, right? We're building it before pedestrians are coming, and they're going to come on the grand opening. But, I know safety is a concern, so you don't have to come up and say that. It's just, that's one thing. The park benches and the amenities, I agree with you, and I guess this is my overall concern, and I think maybe that's part of the transitioning or phasing in plan, is that, the reason why this is really emotional for people, right? We've heard it, is because this is our Plymouth Rock. This is our town's Plymouth Rock. J.J. Slocum, with the Presbyterian group of ministers, walked out here, and I think Prue had mentioned some reference to this the last session, but he said, what's in front and what's behind, and amen, so be it. And they named the town here. And it's not the Jewel parking lot, right? So I think people that say, well, why are you guys spending so much time on this? And it's just a park. I mean, it's really important. It's sacred ground. It's our Plymouth Rock. So I think the blending in concept, especially as it relates to the new amenities added, is really important to make it look and feel like our Plymouth Rock. You know, still our Plymouth Rock. It's new. It's better. You know, it's a master plan we can get behind with. And I don't know how we do that, but it gets to what Guy was saying. I'm not as articulate as Guy to communicate the language of the stone and the wood, but I really think he's onto something there. And, you know, so I'd be willing to support it on the condition that the college try to do that better. And I know Bruce said, and I agree, it's an all-star team. If it's an all-star team, let's make it, you know, not just good, to your point, Bill, but, you know, really, really good on the blending in part. And so I wouldn't say no to the plan, because I think in good faith, based on, you know, on Market Square and some of the efforts, that I think we can do a better job of that, come together. But that's where I'm at.
So I seem to be getting support all the way around. The only question I want to make sure that we've covered is whether or not we like the conditions, need any change conditions. Does anybody have any problem if Jim adds his condition on the bluff? I think that's a reasonable engineering.
Yeah, and there's actually one other condition I wanted to add.
Sure.
And Pauline Moore had mentioned, and I think it's a very good one, contingent upon the, you know, if it's such a no-brainer that we'll be in the National Register, I mean, let's not make it contingent that the park stays in the National Register.
Well, I'm not sure we can control that, is the problem.
No?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Kathy, why don't you give us a
Well,
little color on that for?
I mean,
You can't make it a requirement that the park remain.
We can do anything. Oh, sorry.
I think you can certainly state your intent that through implementation of the plan, it is the commission's understanding and intent that the integrity be preserved to the extent that the park remain a contributing structure.
Well, I think we have some expertise in the audience on this.
Contributing property.
Does anyone have Gail, do you have a sense for guidance on this?
It really should not be a problem.
Please come on up. Yeah. It's you don't have to give us the chapter and verse.
Soldier Field.
Yeah.
Okay. As you all know, something that looked like a Mars landing was plopped into the middle of it. It's not that kind of a situation. We have other elements that are on the National Register that have had changes. Market Square is one. It has not been removed from the National Register. There have been changes on individual properties that are individually listed. They have not been removed. And unless there was someone in this community who made an enormous fuss and went to Washington and said, we think this has been destroyed,
and that
then someone would have to come out and inspect it and decide it had been destroyed, and
That's, I think, what we wanted to know, is somebody would have to make it an overt process to remove it.
I have not been involved in that kind of process, but I would say if we look at Soldier Field and what was done there, and we look at what's proposed here, they are not comparable.
All right, well, I'll let you off the hook then. We'll keep that out of the requirements, because I don't think we can control it.
Well, can we say it's our intent that?
Well, the only way to make sure that it didn't would be you'd have to go ask you'd have to go to Washington and ask them.
Yeah, I think Kurt makes a good point. If we had to check every time a change was made to see if this is going to affect, its designation, it really could.
Yeah, this is Plymouth Rock, though, right, Bill? I mean, it's not every time. It's just one.
It is Plymouth Rock, but if there's a litigious person out in the audience who wants to bog everything down, they could say, wait a second, you're making this change. Have you checked whether it's going to affect its designation as a historic or a cultural landscape?
Is this actually?
One thing, if I might. When you're listed on the National Register, that does not preclude you from rehabilitating your property. And that's what's an issue here. So if we were going to mow down all the trees, put a ball field in, okay, that would be an issue.
Yeah.
But
it seems like a low hurdle. It's a low hurdle.
National
I guess that's my
Register
point.
listing does not prevent you from making changes to meet contemporary needs
Yeah.
within the criteria of rehabilitation.
And
Thanks.
it would not be inappropriate for you to state in your, remember, you're sending a recommendation to the city council. Would not be inappropriate for you to state, the commission's recommendation is forwarded with the intent that implementation of the master plan will not alter the status of the historic designation of the park. Keep in mind that this is also in our local district, something that this commission controls. If the result of this was
like that.
something horrible, the de-designation would actually come to this commission. So I think it would be perfectly appropriate. I think that intent is consistent. I don't want to speak for the Forest Park Project Board, but I think that intent is consistent with what the master plan is expected to do.
But stating an intent is not making it a condition of approval.
No,
I
it's
think that's-
making sure you
that's
guys
where
come
our-
off as the good guys. I
Yeah,
guess.
only to the extent that someone were to propose an overchange to what was just approved that was outside of the, kind of the rationale of maintaining the historic district. So it's kind of talk about a low bar, I don't see it. I mean, we're adding words, which is great, and I think it's probably fine. The intent is there, but I don't see it as being a problem one way or the other.
Okay.
Do we want the condition or not? What do you think? Does it help you to have that
I like
condition?
it, yeah, I
Okay.
like it,
I
'cause
mean,
I
I don't
think-
think it hurts us to have it.
I mean, I
think
don't know,
it-
we can,
I've said my piece, and, if the other commissioners
What do you
feel that it's appropriate, I'm not gonna.
In terms of how it might inform city council and make them feel more comfortable with our recommendation, if it's an aid to them, I think it might be worthwhile as an inclusion.
Okay, that's fine with me.
That's primarily what city council requested from us several years ago, is our feedback and our assistance in their making the best possible decision.
Okay.
So,
the other question on the phase-in, I mean, is 22 benches to 11 and one table to start, and there's some blend-in comments and there's just general design comments. I mean, what's the staging process of that coming back here?
Well, I think there's two, and Kathy, I hope this is the way that the condition is interpreted. I think there's kind of two different things going on here. One is that it's probably unlikely that someone will come and build all of these improvements at once and there'll be a light switch and the park will be done. And so any plan that's developed for the construction of the park would be nice if the park is enclosed for 5 years, and, the transition of how you use it and all that, that's part of the construction means and methods that we don't really have any purview over, but the city council does, because they're gonna let the contract for this, or allow the contract to be let for this. So, transition to me is two things. It's allowing yourself some breathing room to see what's working and what's not working, and if you don't like, part of the solution, maybe you change it as you go. That's part of the transition, why you would maybe put 11 benches in first and then see if you need another 3 or 4 over here, right? That's, I think, overtly spoken in this. The other part is the condition that we're talking about with respect to the appropriateness, which is to continue to press them to think about the changing the amenities from the bluff to the west side of the park. And I would expect if we adopt that condition that the staff is recommending, and the city council reinforces that condition, then I would expect that we at some point would see stuff coming back to us as part of the signage package and structures that are, mostly away from the bluff edge of the park. And I think that's what it's intended to do, so.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions, deliberations, comments, guidance?
Yeah, to speak to that last comment or recommendation from staff about the transition from lighter amenities to the left, or to the west, and proceeding to more natural and maybe heavier to the east. I would defer ruling on that till we saw what was proposed. And I would say it would be better to make those decisions based upon those specific features rather than on a general pre-adopted aesthetic concept.
I think that's...
I don't disagree with the concept, but I think
Yeah.
what it translates into might be something that we would not want. And I think you want to see what the forms are that actually come forward, and whether they agree with that preliminary going in approach is not important.
And that's why it's so important to give the design team time to react to that concept, and they can continue to propose whatever they want. It just will come back to us again for consideration, hopefully with signage and with monument information and the rest of the, the accoutrements that go along with that, because they're all part and parcel to the solution on that. But yet, I don't think it would be understanding that that they're free to continue with the elements that they've suggested east of the path allows them to design and allows them, a framework. If you handcuff them with respect to the amenities that are everywhere in the park, then it's basically saying you got to come back with all of us. And I think that's an important distinction. If we want them to come back with all of it, we should say that. We should tell them that or we should recommend that to City Council. I think that those are two different things. I think that Kathy's done a real nice job trying to craft language that allowed them to continue to proceed with plans and planning, and yet, consider how the impact of those items might affect the other signage and monument solutions. And frankly, the picnic tables, since they might not show up on day one, you might think about those differently. You might find out that you really don't like sitting in those benches, that they're not comfortable, and so that's, all of that kind of due diligence, I think, happens through the construction period. And, I'm happy with the language as it is. I think that the context of the limestone, it gets dirty, it goes dark, particularly the stone benches that are east of the path. Don't bother me at all. They're a context, they reference the beach, if you will. The benches, the things that I find are more, not offensive, but more out of context with the rest of Lake Forest are the bike racks and the trash enclosures and the heavy picnic tables, because they are so clunky. They don't feel like they're part of what I would expect to see here. And so, I would hope that those are the elements that have an opportunity to transition somehow. And I don't know what even that means. Maybe it all resolves itself quite nicely the way you're saying, and the hard line should be Lake Road, and I think we could leave that for some fine tuning. Frankly, if we give this language to them, then they're free to challenge it in the future with a future proposal. And frankly, the City Council can tell us we're crazy too. What do you think?
What do you think?
Well, how do we craft our motion?
Well,
should we
I support it.
Suggestion?
Yeah, I support the plan with the conditions that, and there's two motions here. There's one to approve a plan and one to give a certificate of appropriateness. I support them both with the staff conditions. I think the plan's come a long way. I think that we've split the baby a number of ways here, and I think that if we continue to do so, we're not necessarily improving at that point. So I'd like to entertain a motion to just approve the plan and then approve and grant a certificate of appropriateness. But that's just me, so you guys have to.
Could we ask for staff input at this particular point for
Please.
Potentially?
I was going to make the point that if you choose to move forward, it would be appropriate to make two motions, one on the plan itself. And I did hear in your discussion that you asked for 2 additional conditions to be added.
Mm-hmm.
And the language on these might not be exactly right. Prior to construction activity near the bluff, all necessary studies and evaluations shall be completed to assure no negative impact to the integrity of the bluff. Considerations shall include, but not be limited to, requirements for protective fencing and appropriate limitations on construction vehicle access to the area near the bluff, something like that. The second was the condition with respect to intent, and maybe this isn't a condition, maybe this gets framed in the actual recommendation, but some language to the effect that the commission intends that the implementation of the master plan will not alter the status of the historic designation of the park.
Yeah, and Kathy, I think there's a couple ways that could be incorporated into the plan. It could be incorporated into the plan itself, or it could be, or it could just be a condition. I'm not sure we care one way or the other. It's almost better if it's incorporated into the plan itself, because then it's part of the document that survives.
Your condition could ask that it be, that statement of intent be incorporated.
Would you have any problem? I think that makes sense. Let's put that in the plan, and then we're good. Okay. Any other, I think those are the two conditions for the approval of the plan.
Those are the two additional
I'm
conditions.
sorry, correct?
Okay,
Yes.
okay, so then, would you take a motion?
I would take a motion
Okay,
for
then I'd move to recommend approval of the master plan as presented with the conditions in the staff report, plus the two conditions that have just been articulated by the staff.
So the motion's been made by Commissioner Ransom. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Moyer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So that passes unanimously. Congratulations on the plan. How about on the certificate of appropriateness?
The only question is are we gonna put anything in, further in, as far as concerns about the amenities?
So right now, the condition that
We have the
is,
transitioning from lighter to heavier
yeah,
elements, which I'm comfortable with,
Mhm.
but I just want to make sure that other commissioners don't want anything further before I or somebody else makes a motion. No?
I'm okay with it, the way it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, then I would move to recommend approval of a certificate of appropriateness for the elements that are laid out in the staff report and subject to the conditions stated therein.
All right. So we have three conditions, correct? Two on the bluff walk, well, one on the bluff walk, one on the west path, one on the park transition. Is that correct, Kathy? That's what you have?
I wasn't clear if the commission was including the condition on the bluff walk or not. I
Yeah, I
didn't hear
think we
much
do.
discussion on that. And you probably should get a second to the motion before you begin discussion.
I'm sorry? Do I have a second for that motion?
Seconded.
Seconded by Commissioner Preschlack. So before we vote on the motion, can we make sure that we're talking about all three of those conditions? I think that for my vote, I like all three of those conditions.
Well, I guess,
Would you like some specificity on the bluff walk?
no, it isn't the bluff walk, I think that's.
On the
it's-
park furnishings?
No, it's the altering the
Ah.
the west path.
Well, I think that's a product of what happens at the bluff walk.
Oh, yeah,
So,
okay.
so
I
that-
agree.
Yeah, okay.
So I will stand by my motion.
All right, the motion's been made and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And so that passes unanimously as well. Congratulations. I believe that we have now opportunity for the public to address the Historic Preservation Commission on any non-agenda items, if there's any. And I see none, so I will see if there's any additional information from the staff.
You do have a meeting next week to make your third this month, and it will be Commissioner Berg's last meeting.
So everyone will want to be in attendance for that. Except for, all right, I'll take a motion to adjourn if there is one.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Commissioner Berg. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Preschlack. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you and good evening. Congratulations.